It's a pleasure to speak about Noah Webster. Uh, Again, Dictionary Day is October 16th, and Noah Webster was born on October 16th, 1758. So he would be 267 years old today. And Dictionary Day is an American thing. And the reason is that Webster in 1828 published his American Dictionary. And that's what I'd like to push back a little bit today. And I'm going to argue that that Dictionary Day is really a worldwide event because Noah Webster has really had an impact on dictionaries all over the world. And for instance, uh, there's a terrific new book called Unabridged that's coming out this week about the world of dictionaries. And I love the book and it's terrific. But I just push back a little bit because the author Stephen Fatsis says that all things dictionary in the U.S. descend from Noah Webster, and I just want to push back a little bit, and maybe we could take out U.S. and say all things dictionary or English dictionary descend from Noah Webster, and my argument is twofold. One is that Webster had a huge impact on British lexicography. I mean, the Brits came up with the Oxford English Dictionary in the late 19th century, and that's widely considered the best English language dictionary. But as I will argue that that dictionary actually owes a lot to Noah Webster, much more than is commonly assumed. And I'll quote from James Murray, the editor of the Oxford English Dictionary, who called Webster a great man, a born definer of words. So James Murray himself really saw Webster as a pivotal figure in British lexicography. And the other argument is just like the dollar is kind of the world currency right now, American English is really the world language. I mean, it's the language of business. In China or Europe, I mean, so many people now speak English and use dictionaries, and they're really learning American English, and that's the language that Noah Webster really gave us. And and Noah Webster's dates are 1758 to 1843. And in 1858, Jefferson Davis, the future president of the Confederacy, uh, who then was a senator from Mississippi, said, "We have a unity of language which no other people possess, and we owe this unity above all to Noah Webster." So he really gave us American English. And America, we're the most ethnically diverse nation on the face of the earth. But what's so fascinating is we really all speak the same language. From California to Maine, we can all understand each other because we speak American English. And as I argue that that's really almost the world language right now, just like the dollar is the world currency. All right, Webster was born in 1758 in West Hartford. So the house that he was born in is now the museum, which you can visit in West Hartford. And he was a member of the class of 1778 from Yale. And just to give you a sense of how dramatic his life was, when he was a sophomore at Yale one summer, he fought in the American Revolution at the Battle of Saratoga. So he had a very busy life, and was he wore all kinds of hats. And his first major accomplishment was in 1783 when he wrote the Blueback's Speller. It was a spelling book, and it replaced the British spellers. And what he did was, and that was really his first attempt to create American English through a spelling book. And he gave little examples for students to read. And the examples had the names of American cities as opposed to British cities, which the previous spelling book had. And so that was his first attempt to sort of codify American English. And Noah Webster had uh, was a was a multifaceted polyglot. And the late Howard Lamar, the former president of Yale, has described him as a multiple founding father. Uh, so he had obviously the dictionary, which comes in 1828, is his major achievement. Besides the speller, the remarkable thing about the speller is that it sold 100 million copies. I mean, every school child from the 1780s till about 1900 grew up with the speller. So he had a huge impact on American culture. But he also was a political theorist. In 1785, he wrote a 1785, when America had the Articles of Confederation, he wrote a theoretical treatise called Sketches of American Policy, in which he made the argument that the Articles of Confederation wasn't strong enough and that America should do something like they needed a new document. It was basically an argument for the Constitution, and he was a mover and shaker already. And in 1785, he traveled to Mount Vernon, where he met George Washington. And that's how my book starts, with Webster going to Mount Vernon, and he handed Washington a copy of this 20-page pamphlet proposing a constitution. Well, Washington wasn't a policy wonk, but Washington then decided to hand it on to his right-hand man, James Madison, and Madison then incorporated some of the Webster's ideas into the Constitution when he started thinking about it a couple of years later. So he was a pioneering political theorist. He also was a pioneer in American copyright law. He had the speller, and he wanted to sell the speller, and he went around to every state and in the 1780s, and he uh, ended up changing American copyright law. That was another of his achievements. In 1793, he became the editor of New York City's first newspaper. It was called the American Minerva. The American Minerva, he was editor for about 5 years. And in 1801, it got some stiff competition from the New York Post, which is still around, and that was started by Alexander Hamilton. But Webster's paper preceded Hamilton's, and it was New York City's first daily newspaper. Another massive achievement was that in 1799, he wrote a treatise, a brief history of epidemic and pestilential diseases. And there was the yellow fever scare in the 1790s, and cities like Philadelphia lost a few thousand people in 1 year. And Webster studied it and wrote this brief history, which was about 700 pages long. So he's also the founder of American public health research. But his main achievement is the dictionary. And in 1798, he moves back to New Haven from New York City, and he settles in Benedict Arnold's house. Benedict Arnold was disgraced, the traitor during the Revolution, and Webster gets a good deal. And it's one of the nicest houses in town, but it's kind of like buying Bernie Madoff's house. And it's the house was near the train station, and so Webster settles into that house and decides to write the dictionary. Uh, in 1806, he writes a first draft of the dictionary, which is called A Compendious Dictionary of the English Language, uh, which is a short version of just a few thousand words. It's kind of a warm-up, and then he's going to spend the next 20 years uh, working on the dictionary. And as you can see in New Haven, at the New Haven Museum on Saturday, they have this his original manuscript in 18 that covers A, and so he starts working on it in about 1807. Now, I tell you that Noah Webster had a huge influence on the rest of the world, and that his dictionary was revered by the Brits, but he did make one wrong turn. And that was a wrong turn that he made in 1809. is that he started writing an etymology, and not much was known about etymology in those days. And Webster had his own kind of idiosyncratic ideas, and he ended up spending several years on etymology. And a lot has been written on this since, but his etymologies were just about all wrong. And but they were in the dictionary of 1828, but they were later taken out after his death. And I can say a little bit more about that. And as James Murray said, etymology is word history, and word history is a record of facts. And unfortunately, Webster's etymology was very speculative. All right, by 1817, Webster was on C, and by 1821, he was up to H. And a little bit about his method. The New York Public Library has Webster's copy of Samuel Johnson's 1799 dictionary, and all lexicographers kind of steal from one another, and Webster stole a lot of Johnson. Uh, One scholar, a Johnson scholar, Joseph Reed, said that for one letter, Webster literally stole about 30% of the definitions from Johnson. And that dictionary is marked up. But what Webster ended up doing was also greatly expanding Johnson, because Johnson was a literary man, and Webster, just like Americans to this day, was more of a techie. And Webster had a real appreciation for science and technology, and he added all kinds of scientific words into the dictionary, words that Johnson didn't incorporate into the dictionary. And the other thing is that Webster uh, became a Congregationalist, and for the Congregationalists, they really didn't like Shakespeare and theater. For them, Shakespeare was like a couple of steps away from sex. So you can see in Webster's annotations on Johnson's 1799 dictionary that whenever Johnson refers to Shakespeare, Webster would put a little X on it and he would take it out. And there was this, Webster had the sense that Shakespeare was a little bit too racy to be included in his dictionary. All right, in 1824, Webster goes to England and he does some research in London and Paris. And this is also an interesting sidelight of Webster, which is rarely mentioned by lexicographers, is that even though today we think of Webster as the creator of American English, which he certainly was, he also was a genius at marketing. And he was great at marketing the speller. In the 1780s, he went on book tours and he really started America's publishing industry. And in 1825, he initially wants to write a dictionary, uh, calling it the Universal Dictionary of English. And he tries to set up a conference between Oxford and Cambridge and him, but the Brits don't go for it. So initially, he did want to write, kind of a universal dictionary that would cover both American English and British English, but it didn't fly. And then he gave up and he slapped on this very patriotic preface. And what he said was that this is an American dictionary and that we Americans should be proud of some of our great writers. And although we didn't have Shakespeare, we did have, great political writers. We did have James Madison. So he cites a lot of American authors in the 1828 dictionary, and he's partly responsible for putting American letters and America on the map. All right, Webster then creates a second edition in 1841, and he dies in 1843. At his death, he's still working on the dictionary, and he's always adding words. And in the 1840s, he's adding words like aerodynamics and agronomy. And one of my favorite finds was that at Harvard's Houghton Library, I found Emily Dickinson's copy of Webster's 1841 dictionary. And in a very touching letter, Emily Dickinson refers to his dictionary as her sole companion. She was, she would thumb through it constantly. And what's so moving about her dictionary at Harvard is that it's just thumbed so intensely. You can just get the feeling of just how closely she looked at it. So Webster dies in 1843, and then there's this problem, which is that Webster uh, had these false etymologies. So eventually, uh, the Merriam-Webster company takes over, and they've got to deal with these false etymologies. It takes over from the family. Webster had one son, William, who worked. He had seven children, one son, who the son worked in the dictionary, but eventually the Merriam-Webster company takes over. And what's so interesting about this 1864 dictionary is that so Webster was the end of what I call the one-man bands. Samuel Johnson did the dictionary by himself, and Webster did the dictionary by himself. And now, as you can imagine, a dictionary takes, a zillion people, and the Oxford English Dictionary, James Murray was the editor, but it, relied on contributions from thousands of volunteer editors. And the 1864 dictionary, what's so interesting about that is that Noah Porter, who later becomes a Yale president, was the editor of the dictionary, and it was really the product of the Yale faculty. So what I like to emphasize that's often, not acknowledged is that, New Haven and the Yale faculty, is really central to the history of English lexicography, and that's often lost and forgotten. And just to say, so the 1864 dictionary comes out. It's edited by the Yale faculty, and it's a huge success. James Murray says it's the best of the one-volume dictionaries. And I once asked an archivist and Oxford, whatever happened to James Murray's copy of the 1864 dictionary. And I was told that he used it so much uh, that it was pulverized. So the Webster's 18, so the OED is not just a separate British invention, but it really directly leans on Webster's dictionary. And that's something that's often lost in the history. And to give you an example of that, and it's just a fascinating document that I found at Beinecke in the Merriam-Webster papers, is that some of you may have read The Professor and the Madman, which was a popular book by Simon Winchester that came out about 25 years ago. And that's the story of how James Murray, the editor of the Oxford English Dictionary, relied on the contributions of this volunteer, a fellow named W.C. Minor. And what was interesting about W.C. Minor is that he gave James Murray his definitions from a British insane asylum. He had murdered someone in Britain and was in an insane asylum, and from there he supplied Murray with thousands of definitions. Well, the reason I mention Minor is that Minor went to med school at Yale, and in the Merriam-Webster files at Beinecke, I found the contract that Minor signed to write the to work on the 1864 dictionary. So he was a part of that 1864 dictionary, and James Murray considered him one of his best volunteers, one of his best definition writers. But what's interesting is that in the 1864 dictionary, Minor was considered the weak link. So when the reviews of the 1864 dictionary came out in the Atlantic and other national magazines of the era, they all said it was fantastic, but the one problem was the definitions of W.C. Minor that were lousy. So the point that I like to make is that the OED's star definer, W.C. Minor, couldn't cut it in American lexicography. And that's why, again, I'm making this argument that Noah Webster, there's really a direct link between Noah Webster and British lexicography because the OED relied so heavily on the 1864 dictionary. And what Murray said was that Webster was a born definer of words. So he had his weak area, which was etymologies, where uh, he was very speculative, and that was cleaned up in 1864 and then beautifully done in the OED, where they talk about the first use of words and then give detailed word histories. But Webster was really a great definer, and that's what Murray acknowledged. And I just want to give you an example of that. Uh, he could really just give you fine distinctions. So Samuel Johnson, for instance, when the word ability, uh, Samuel Johnson said the power to do anything depending on skill, riches, or strength, capacity, quality, and power. But Webster did more than just give us, did present synonymous terms. He wrote tightly knit little mini essays. So when defining ability, he said physical power, whether bodily or mental, natural or acquired, force of understanding, skill in arts or science. And then he would give little illustrative sentences. Ability is active power or power to perform as opposed to capacity or power to receive. So I think that's Webster's greatest strength, which was this finely honed analytic mind. And I think that also has had a huge impact on world lexicography.